Across the galaxy, there was a universal consensus: stars are scorching, black holes are to be avoided, and humans are utterly insane. However, nobody, not even the most esteemed members of the core council of reasonably intelligent species, anticipated that humans would host the ultimate Deathworld challenge. Earth was notorious, after all, as a planet where even the flora posed a deadly threat. Consequently, when the Galactic broadcast crackled to life with the announcement, it was met with a mixture of astonishment, bewilderment, and a touch of primal fear. This year boomed the voice of Shram GLX, the 7-foot-tall insectoid host whose charisma rivaled that of a hyperactive flea market vendor. The galaxy's most demanding test of survival will occur on the perilous planet Earth, home of the infamous humans. Prepare yourselves, contestants, for the greatest challenge you'll ever encounter. The galaxy held its collective breath. What horrors had the humans devised? A trek across volcanic wastelands? Bare-knuckle brawls with bears amidst raging blizzards? A week of exposure to Earth's internet? The broadcast abruptly shifted to a live image of Earth. A human, clad in an ill-fitting suit and exuding the unsettling enthusiasm of someone who had clearly embellished their resume, grinned at the camera. "Greetings, Galactic contestants," the man declared, his voice brimming with a disconcerting optimism. "I'm Greg. Welcome to Earth. We've devised a very special challenge for you. It's a traditional survival ritual that we humans hold dear." Behind Greg, a table laden with brightly colored boxes came into view. There was a momentary pause as the galaxy collectively squinted at the image. "Surely, that couldn't be." "Yes," Greg exclaimed, extending his arms like a magician revealing the punchline to a cosmic joke. "It's game night." Panic rippled across countless star systems. On the planet Zorvo, an ambassador collapsed. On Kretzel Prime, a council of sages collectively murmured, "What in the great nebula?" Meanwhile, the human delegation calmly explained their rationale. "You see," Greg continued, now holding aloft a box labeled Monopoly, "Earth's game night isn't simply about amusement. It's about survival. Can you withstand the treachery, the shattered alliances, the sheer fury when someone pilfers your railroad?" He chuckled, seemingly oblivious to the fact that the fate of the universe hung precariously in the balance. "We reasoned that this would be the ultimate test of your species' adaptability, diplomacy, and, well, endurance." The rules were straightforward. Each species would dispatch a representative who would participate in a series of games, ranging from the diplomatically devastating Risk to the physically improbable Twister. The objective was not necessarily to win, though that was a secondary goal, but to endure the emotional rollercoaster without appending the table. Flipping the table, Greg clarified, resulted in immediate disqualification and a lifetime ban from Earth's game nights. The galaxy would later discover this rule was established after a particularly heated Scrabble match involving the Australian delegation. A week later, the contestants disembarked from their spacecraft, exuding a mixture of bravado and thinly veiled apprehension. The first to emerge was Galactic, a gelatinous mass from planet Blorax, possessing 3 pseudopods and a reputation for mathematical genius. "We Bloraxians are impervious to emotional manipulation," Galactic declared smugly, as a human assistant presented it with a copy of Uno. Next came Vargulath, an imposing reptilian warrior from Carto 4, whose biceps appeared capable of bench-pressing a starship. "I shall conquer this game night," Var roared, flexing dramatically as a human casually handed him a twister mat. His confidence wavered slightly when the mat's multicolored circles were explained. Finally, the door of a smaller ship creaked open, revealing a diminutive, bird-like alien named Fizzle-Kip Philip, hailing from the tranquil moon of Snurk. "Is there a version of these games involving less physical contact?" it inquired in a voice tinged with preemptive apology. Greg grinned at it with the benevolence of someone who had already decided the answer was no. The stage was set. Representatives from 27 planets assembled in a brightly lit Earth Convention Center, their faces, or their closest equivalents, etched with varying degrees of dread. The table was covered in games, each box gleaming like a Pandora's box of chaos. A banner overhead proclaimed in garish glitter, "Welcome to Earth's ultimate game night." Greg clapped his hands. "All right, everyone, let's get started. First up, Monopoly. I hope you brought your diplomatic skills. As the contestants took their seats, tentative smiles masked their growing panic. One thought echoed across the galactic collective consciousness: how bad could it possibly be? The humans smiled. It was about to get much, much worse. The galaxy watched with a mixture of fascination and trepidation as the first game of Monopoly unfolded. Glac threw, the Bloraxian blob of mathematical prowess, meticulously moved his metallic dog token, acquiring properties with a detached efficiency that belied his earlier pronouncements about the primitive nature of ownership. Meanwhile, Var-Gulath, the reptilian warrior, embraced the capitalist spirit with an alarming fervor. He quickly amassed a real estate empire, his booming pronouncements about inevitable conquest punctuated by the clatter of plastic houses and hotels. Fizzle-Kip Philip, the diminutive avian, however, experienced the harsh realities of the free market firsthand. Repeatedly landing on properties owned by his more aggressive competitors, Fizzle-Kip quickly accumulated a debt that would make a galactic loan shark blush. I appear to be experiencing a novel form of distress, it chirped faintly, as Greg cheerfully offered another loan, further solidifying its financial ruin. As the game wore on, the initially jovial atmosphere curdled into something resembling a diplomatic summit gone wrong. Glac-Thru's pseudopods quivered with barely suppressed frustration as it attempted to calculate the probability of escaping Var-Gulath's ever-expanding property empire. Var, meanwhile, grew increasingly emboldened, his roars of triumph echoing through the convention center each time an opponent landed on one of his properties. Fizzle-Kip, buried under a mountain of debt, could only stare forlornly at its dwindling pile of Monopoly money, muttering something about the inherent cruelty of human economic systems. Greg, blissfully oblivious to the rising tensions, continued to offer encouraging words and snacks, seemingly convinced that this was all perfectly normal behavior. Just like a family gathering back on Earth, he chirped, popping another pretzel into his mouth. The game finally concluded with Glac-Thru declaring bankruptcy, Var-Gulath proclaiming himself the undisputed monopoly overlord, and Fizzle-Kip attempting to calculate the odds of a meteor striking Earth before the next game began. The contestants, visibly shaken but still in one piece, barely had time to recover before Greg, ever the enthusiastic host, unveiled the next challenge, Twister. This one's a little more hands-on, he explained, unrolling the brightly colored mat with the flourish of a magician revealing a particularly dangerous illusion. Var-Gulath surveyed the mat with a predatory gleam in his eyes. This is a test of physical prowess, he roared, flexing his impressive biceps. I shall prevail. Glac-Thru, however, seemed less confident. We Bloraxians are not designed for such contortions, it gurgled, its pseudopods shifting nervously. Fizzle-Kip, still traumatized by the financial devastation of Monopoly, merely chirped, must we? The ensuing spectacle was precisely as chaotic as one might expect. Glac-Thru's gelatinous form struggled to maintain any semblance of balance, its pseudopods slipping and sliding across the mat like sentient slugs. Var-Gulath, true to his warrior nature, treated each move like a gladiatorial combat, growling and flexing with every awkward stretch. Fizzle-Kip, meanwhile, flapped its tiny wings in a desperate attempt to avoid touching any of the other contestants, its chirps of protest growing increasingly frantic with each spin of the arrow. Left hand green. Greg announced cheerfully, seemingly oblivious to the fact that several of the contestants lacked the necessary appendages to comply. I do not possess hands. Var-Gulath roared, contorting his reptilian body into a position that seemed to defy the laws of physics. Right foot blue. Greg continued, prompting Fizzle-Kip to chirp indignantly, my feet do not bend that way. By the end of the round, the twister mat resembled a particularly abstract piece of modern art, a tangled mess of limbs, pseudopods, claws, and feathers. Glac-Thru declared itself physically compromised. Var-Gulath demanded a rematch. And Fizzle-Kip quietly contemplated the possibility of feigning unconsciousness to escape the next game. Greg, however, remained undeterred. Great job, everyone, he declared, clapping his hands together. Next up, Uno. The collective groan from the contestants was loud enough to rattle the convention center's windows. The brightly colored Uno cards were dealt, each one a potential weapon in this bizarre human ritual. Greg, ever the jovial host, explained the simple rules: match colors and numbers, play action cards strategically, and above all, declare before laying down your final card. Simple enough, the alien contestants thought, until the game actually began. Galactic, with its mathematical mind, initially approached with a cool, calculated precision. Its pseudopods flicked cards onto the discard pile with an efficiency that suggested a deep understanding of probability and game theory. Vargulath, however, interpreted as a battle of wills, slamming down cards with the force of a meteor strike and roaring with triumph every time he managed to match a color. Fizzlekip, still traumatized by Monopoly and Twister, played timidly, placing cards down with a hesitant chirp, as if apologizing for participating at all. The initial civility quickly dissolved as the game progressed. Galactic, realizing that pure logic wasn't enough to conquer this chaotic human pastime, began employing a more aggressive strategy. It played draw 2 cards with a wicked glee, its pseudopods quivering with satisfaction as its opponent's hand swelled with unwanted cards. Vargulath, faced with a mounting pile of cards, grew increasingly agitated. His roars of frustration echoed through the convention center as he struggled to find a matching card, his reptilian eyes narrowing with suspicion at every play. Fizzlekip, meanwhile, found itself buried under an avalanche of cards, its tiny wings flapping in a futile attempt to escape the relentless onslaught of colors and numbers. "Is this some kind of elaborate torture?" it chirped weakly, as Greg cheerfully offered it another draw pile. The tension in the room crackled like static electricity. Galactic, sensing victory, held up its final card, a triumphant grin spreading across its gelatinous face. It boomed, only to be met with Greg's gentle correction. "You have to say it before you play the card," he explained, prompting Galactic to let out a frustrated gurgle. Vargulath, seizing the opportunity, slammed down a skip card, effectively blocking Fizzlekip's turn and redirecting the flow of the game back towards Galactic. "Take that, blob," he roared, a predatory gleam in his eyes. Fizzlekip, now buried under a mountain of cards, could only offer a weak chirp of despair. The game reached its chaotic climax with a flurry of action cards, reverse turns, and increasingly desperate attempts to get rid of cards. Galactic, driven to the edge of sanity by the constant barrage of draw 2 and draw 4 cards, finally snapped. "This is an outrage," it gurgled, its pseudopods flailing wildly. Vargulath, sensing an opportunity to capitalize on the chaos, played a reverse card, sending the game spiraling back towards Galactic. "Victory is mine," he bellowed, only to be thwarted by Fizzlekip, who, in a moment of unexpected brilliance, played a wild draw 4 card, changing the color and forcing Vargulath to draw 4 cards. The game finally ended, not with a clear winner, but with a collective sigh of relief. The contestants, emotionally drained and mentally exhausted, slumped back in their chairs, the brightly colored cards scattered across the table like the remnants of a particularly brutal battle. Greg, however, remained unfazed. "Great game, everyone," he chirped, oblivious to the palpable tension in the room. "Who's ready for charades?" The brightly colored cards were distributed, each a potential instrument of chaos in this peculiar human tradition. Greg, ever the affable MC, outlined the straightforward guidelines: match colors and numbers, utilize action cards strategically, and crucially, announce before playing one's final card. It seemed simple enough to the extraterrestrial participants, a deceptive facade that crumbled as soon as the game commenced. Galactic, leveraging its mathematical acumen, initially tackled with a calm, analytical precision. Its pseudopods deftly flicked cards onto the discard pile with an efficiency hinting at a profound comprehension of probability and game theory. Vargulath, on the other hand, perceived as a contest of sheer willpower, slamming down cards with the impact of a small meteor and roaring triumphantly whenever a color match was achieved. Fizzlekip, still reeling from the financial ruin of Monopoly and the contortions of Twister, played cautiously, laying down cards with a timid chirp as if seeking forgiveness for its participation. The veneer of civility rapidly disintegrated as the game wore on. Galactic, recognizing that pure logic was inadequate to conquer this chaotic human pastime, adopted a more assertive approach. It wielded draw 2 cards with malicious glee, its pseudopods twitching with satisfaction as its opponent's hands filled with unwanted cards. Vargulath, confronted with an ever-growing stack of cards, became increasingly agitated. His roars of frustration reverberated through the convention center as he struggled to locate a matching card, his reptilian eyes narrowing with suspicion at every move. Fizzlekip, meanwhile, found itself submerged beneath an avalanche of cards, its small wings fluttering in a vain attempt to escape the relentless onslaught of colors and numbers. "Is this some elaborate form of psychological torment?" it chirped feebly, as Greg cheerfully presented it with yet another draw pile. The atmosphere in the room crackled with palpable tension. Galactic, sensing impending victory, brandished its final card, a smug grin spreading across its gelatinous face. "You know," it proclaimed, only to be corrected by Greg's gentle intervention. "You need to announce it before playing the card," he explained, eliciting a frustrated gurgle from Galactic. Vargulath, seizing the opportune moment, slammed down a skip card, effectively thwarting Fizzlekip's turn and redirecting the game's flow back toward Galactic. "Take that, gelatinous weakling," he roared, a predatory glint in his eyes. Fizzlekip, now buried under a veritable mountain of cards, could only manage a faint chirp of despair. The game reached its tumultuous culmination in a flurry of action cards, reverse turns, and increasingly desperate attempts to discard cards. Galactic, driven to the brink of madness by the ceaseless barrage of draw 2 and draw 4 cards, finally snapped. "This is an abomination," it gurgled, its pseudopods flailing wildly. Vargulath, recognizing an opening to capitalize on the chaos, played a reverse card, sending the game spiraling back towards Galactic. "Victory is within my grasp," he bellowed, only to be thwarted by Fizzlekip, who, in a flash of unexpected ingenuity, played a wild draw 4 card, shifting the color and compelling Vargulath to draw 4 cards. The game finally concluded, not with a definitive victor, but with a collective exhale of relief. The participants, emotionally depleted and mentally drained, slumped back in their chairs, the vividly colored Uno cards scattered across the table like the remnants of a particularly vicious skirmish. Greg, however, remained unperturbed. "Excellent game, everyone," he chirped, seemingly oblivious to the pervasive tension in the room. "Now, who's prepared for a round of charades?" The brightly colored cards of Uno were dispersed among the contestants, each card a potential instrument of mayhem in this unusual human custom. Greg, perpetually the amiable host, reiterated the simple instructions: match colors or numbers, deploy action cards strategically, and above all, declare Uno before placing one's last card. It sounded straightforward to the alien competitors, a deceptive simplicity that shattered the moment the game commenced. Galactic, harnessing its mathematical prowess, initially engaged with Uno with a cool, calculated precision, flicking cards onto the discard pile with an efficiency that hinted at a deep grasp of probability and game theory. Vargulath, however, viewed Uno as a test of sheer willpower, slamming down cards with the force of a minor meteor impact and roaring in triumph with every successful color match. Fizzlekip, still reeling from the financial ruin of Monopoly and the contortions of Twister, played tentatively, gingerly laying cards down with a soft chirp, as if apologizing for its participation. The initial veneer of politeness quickly eroded as the game wore on. Galactic, recognizing the inadequacy of logic alone to conquer this chaotic human pastime, shifted to a more assertive tactic, wielding draw 2 cards with a perverse delight, its pseudopods twitching with satisfaction as its opponent's hand swelled with unwanted cards. Vargulath, confronted with a burgeoning stack of cards, became increasingly restless. His roars of frustration reverberated through the convention center as he searched for a matching card, his reptilian eyes narrowing with suspicion at each play. Fizzlekip, meanwhile, found itself drowning under a cascade of cards, its tiny wings fluttering in a vain effort to escape the relentless barrage of colors and numbers. "Is this some sort of intricate form of torture?" it chirped faintly, as Greg cheerfully offered it another draw pile. The atmosphere in the room crackled with a palpable tension. Galactic, sensing imminent victory, held its final card aloft, a self-satisfied smirk spreading across its gelatinous face. "Uno," it proclaimed, only to be met with Greg's gentle but firm correction: "You need to announce it before you play the card." The correction elicited a frustrated gurgle from Galactic. Vargulath, capitalizing on the moment, slammed down a skip card, effectively blocking Fizzlekip's turn and redirecting the game's flow back toward Galactic. Ha! Take that, gelatinous simpleton, he roared, a predatory gleam in his eyes. Fizzlekip, now buried under a mountain of cards, could only manage a faint, despairing chirp. The game reached a tumultuous peak in a whirlwind of action cards, reverse turns, and increasingly desperate attempts to discard cards. Galactic, driven to the brink of madness by the incessant onslaught of draw 2 and draw 4 cards, finally snapped. This is an outrage, it gurgled, its pseudopods flailing wildly. Vargulath, recognizing an opening to exploit the chaos, played a reverse card, sending the game spiraling back towards Galactic. Victory is at hand, he bellowed, only to be thwarted by Fizzlekip, who, in a flash of unexpected brilliance, played a wild draw 4 card, changing the color and forcing Vargulath to draw 4 cards. The tide of the game turned in a single, unexpected move. The game finally reached its conclusion, not with a clear victor, but with a collective exhale of relief. The participants, emotionally drained and mentally spent, slumped back in their chairs, the vividly hued Uno cards scattered across the table like the remnants of a particularly fierce battle. Greg, however, remained unfazed by the emotional carnage. An excellent game, everyone, he chirped, apparently oblivious to the pervasive tension that still hung heavy in the air. Now, who's prepared for a round of charades? Charades proved to be an even more bewildering experience for the intergalactic contestants. Galactic, still recovering from its near meltdown during Uno, eyed the charades prompts with a mixture of suspicion and dread. Explain again, it gurgled, why must we pretend to be things we are not? Greg, ever the enthusiastic guide through the human social jungle, patiently explained the concept of acting out a word or phrase without speaking. It's all about communication, he declared, a universal language of, well, silliness, mostly. Vargulath, ever the warrior, viewed charades as yet another combat trial. I shall crush this challenge with the power of my performance, he roared, flexing his impressive biceps. Fizzlekip, however, seemed to find the concept somewhat intriguing. Perhaps this will be less physically taxing, it chirped hopefully, its tiny wings fluttering with anticipation. The first round began with Galactic attempting to act out the concept of a cat chasing a laser pointer. Its gelatinous form wobbled and quivered as it tried to mimic feline agility, its pseudopods flailing wildly in an approximation of chasing an invisible light. Vargulath, meanwhile, drew the prompt riding a roller coaster, which he interpreted as a dramatic battle against unseen forces. He roared and thrashed, miming a desperate struggle against imaginary restraints, his reptilian eyes wide with simulated terror. Fizzlekip, surprisingly, excelled at charades, its avian grace lending itself well to acting out concepts like a bird in flight and pecking at seeds. Greg, of course, cheered enthusiastically throughout, offering encouragement and occasionally questionable interpretations of the contestants' performances. As the game progressed, the prompts grew increasingly bizarre. Galactic found itself struggling to convey the meaning of doing the dishes, its pseudopods awkwardly miming the scrubbing of invisible plates. Vargulath, on the other hand, relished the challenge of acting out a volcano erupting, his roars and dramatic gestures resembling a miniature Godzilla attack. Fizzlekip, faced with the prompt a politician giving a speech, simply puffed up its feathers and chirped loudly, an act that, surprisingly, earned it several correct guesses. By the end of the charades round, the contestants were a mixture of bewildered, amused, and utterly exhausted. Galactic declared the entire experience a baffling exercise in absurdity. Vargulath demanded a rematch, convinced that he could have achieved a more convincing portrayal of a volcanic eruption. Fizzlekip, however, seemed to have genuinely enjoyed the game, its small eye sparkling with the thrill of creative expression. Greg, as always, remained unfazed by the chaos. Fantastic job, everyone, he declared, clapping his hands together. Now, who's ready for the final challenge? The final challenge, Pictionary, proved to be a test not of strategic thinking or physical prowess, but of artistic interpretation, a concept utterly alien to most of the contestants. Galactic, whose pseudopods were ill-suited for holding drawing implements, produced a series of abstract swirls that vaguely resembled a cosmic nebula. It is supposed to be a bicycle, it gurgled, its voice tinged with frustration. Var-Gulath, on the other hand, approached the drawing board with the same aggressive enthusiasm he had displayed during Twister. His rendition of a sunset involved a series of violent scribbles that looked suspiciously like a battlefield. Behold, he roared, brandishing his drawing with pride. The fiery demise of 1,000 suns. Fizzle-Kip Philip, surprisingly, demonstrated a hidden talent for art, sketching delicate images with its beak that were surprisingly accurate. Its drawing of a spaceship was so detailed that Greg had to double-check the prompts to make sure it wasn't cheating. As the final round concluded, the scoreboard was largely irrelevant. The contestants, exhausted but oddly exhilarated, sat around the table, surrounded by the remnants of a night of truly bizarre human rituals. Greg, beaming with pride, addressed the weary group. "Congratulations, everyone," he declared. "You've officially completed the Earth Game Night Challenge." The aliens exchanged weary glances. Survived seemed a more appropriate term. But wait, Greg continued, holding up a gleaming trophy shaped like a Monopoly piece, there are still awards to be given. He presented Galactic with the Resilience Award for enduring Twister without any actual limbs. Fizzle-Kip Philip received the Creative Problem-Solving Award for its surprisingly insightful Pictionary drawings. And finally, Var-Gulath was awarded the Spirit of Game Night Award for his enthusiastic, if slightly aggressive, participation. "I demand a trophy of conquest," Var roared, even as he accepted the award with a grudging grunt. As the aliens shuffled towards their ships, Fizzle-Kip Philip paused, turning to its fellow contestants. "Is it just me," it chirped, "or did that feel strangely significant?" Galactic, still slightly gelatinous from its ordeal, wobbled in agreement. "Their games are psychological warfare," it gurgled, "but there is a strange admiration I feel for their chaotic nature." Var-Gulath nodded slowly. "Their madness is their strength," he rumbled. "Earth may not be a death world in the traditional sense, but it tests the very limits of one's sanity. Come back anytime." Greg called after them, "Next time, we'll do karaoke." The aliens exchanged horrified glances and quickened their pace, fleeing back to the safety of their ships. As the last ship disappeared into the night sky, Greg turned to Sheila, who was quietly collecting the scattered game pieces. "Think they had fun?" he asked. Sheila, raising an eyebrow, simply replied, "They looked traumatized." Greg grinned. "Best game night ever," he declared. Somewhere out in the vastness of space, 3 alien species silently agreed Earth wasn't a death world because of its physical dangers. It was a death world because humans had weaponized joy.